the title here for onboarding tactics for highly successful SDR teams. Quick note on how we're defining success. So we really want to focus on reducing ramp time and allowing SDRs or giving the SDRs the ability to operate at peak performance as fast as possible. And then, as John mentioned earlier, limiting turnover. So increasing the average tenure of rep is also going to be one of the outcomes of sort of this improved onboarding methodology. Jumping right in, the first and most important aspect of an onboarding process, not surprisingly to I'm sure many, is training. And I want to focus on training, not, it's nothing groundbreaking. Obviously, I think it makes sense that we'd start with training if we're talking about onboarding. But I think what's important here is to realize that a training program needs to be properly focused. Most sales training programs that we see are not really built for the sales development role specifically. They're built for the sales organization as a whole. They tend to be very valuable for account executives and that sort of function. But as a result, they tend to be very product or solution heavy and very limited in terms of tactical training for the sales development role. That's one of the biggest impacts on lead time that we see. As a result, many reps have a very deep product understanding, but again, lack the tactical and process-related training required to be effective. And this leads to a number of problems that affect ramp time again. Most important things to understand for a sales development rep are really things like value props, client references, quick descriptions of potential use cases. We've done this for this company. They look a lot like you. I'd love to understand your environment and understand how we might be able to help you. So deep product conversations we tend to discourage our reps from having those. Remember, the goal here for sales development reps in this environment is to identify opportunities and set up closing reps to have more in-depth product conversations. So that product knowledge really needs to be owned by the account executive function. Again, most sales training programs developed for closing reps and really don't focus on the tactical training the SDRs need to be successful. So what are some of those tactics? What are some of those tactical training things we can focus on? As far as, I guess before I get into this, any inside sales or sales development manager is going to have a number of these tactics that they'd like their SDRs to employ. It's not my intention here to tell you that these are the you have to use my tactics or that these are the best ones. But I guess what I'm trying to highlight is that most sales training programs don't really focus on these. They tend to be very product specific. So we can jump in. Things like research, on-phone, email, CRM tactics are going to be very important. And we can start with research. Research as it applies to the SDR role is often talked about, but processes around research are rarely developed. We call this process a demandDrive account mapping. It really applies to both inbound and outbound prospecting. And the most important step in the sales development process that seems to be rarely the focus of any training programs is identifying the right person to talk to. It becomes clear that this is the most important step when you just consider it mathematically. We have clients before, when we start an engagement, we typically have sort of a discovery session where we understand how they're currently doing things, and oftentimes we figure out that an approach taken by a lot of these companies is simply to do a keyword search on title and provide their SDRs with a large list of names that they think might be good prospects and have them call through delivering a scripted message. Or, in the case of following up on inbound leads, SDRs seem very reluctant to deviate from the list of inbound leads that is provided to them. When you think about it again, almost like a math problem, a successful connect rate is generally around 15%. It's a little bit like baseball in that sense. So, a great baseball player is going to be not successful 70% of the time, 70% of their plate appearances. So a successful connect rate for a very good sales development rep is around 15%. Inevitably, you're not going to reach everyone you'd like to. So when you think about the total number of activities a sales rep is able to deliver, and you concentrate those only on the most meaningful prospects, that's really what impacts time to lead. It's really what impacts the ramp time. If you're connecting with 15% of the people that you're reaching out to, and you multiply that number by a list of people where only maybe 35% are relevant, the ratios all of a sudden become pretty small. So the important thing to consider here is that learning to identify the right person within an account to target, whether through a referral or through LinkedIn research, is going to dramatically improve ramp time. There are several tools that help SDRs in the research process, and John is going to get into those in a little bit. But the important part here is that rather than focus on product knowledge, tactics like developing a research process, encouraging your reps to map accounts, even when following up on inbound leads is going to be extremely important. Moving on phone tactics, seems logical. Again, a very successful connect rate will have you connecting with about one person out of every 7 attempts. So another way to dramatically improve ramp time or time to lead is to make sure that SDRs are not wasting any of these opportunities when they connect with people. So training programs are going to differ in style. Every SDR manager, every SDR has a different style in terms of introduction, and that's okay. So again, the purpose of this webinar is not to say here's how you introduce a phone call, or here's how you introduce yourself when connecting with a prospect. But rather, it's to point out that most training programs don't focus on this, and it's the most important part of an SDR's training program. So again, when it comes to phone tactics, everyone has their own style. This may be a bit of a silly analogy, so bear with me a little bit. But you always hear people talking about, or at least I do, they tell you to buckle up when you're driving in the car, because most accidents, even on short trips, because most accidents happen within 2 miles of your, I'm going to bring this back in a second, so bear with me, 2 miles of your home.
Keep at that.
Yeah. But when you think about this for a minute, obviously that makes a lot of sense. I mean, every time you leave your home, you're going to be within 2 miles of your home, whether you're taking a 100-mile car trip or a 2-mile car trip. So statistically, you're just spending more time there. You're spending more time within 2 miles of your house. Logically, it makes sense that more car accidents tend to happen. So the same kind of thinking can be applied to sales development. Every conversation you're going to have with a prospect is going to start with an introduction. Only a fraction of those are going to progress to the point where you're having an in-depth product discussion with a prospect. And I'm not saying it's not important to understand the product, but what I'm saying is that it seems a little backwards that in most sales development training programs, the product or solution training is at the forefront and the tactical training isn't. When in fact, every conversation you're going to have with someone is going to include an introduction. Is going to require the SDR to try to gain some interest very quickly with the prospect. I hope that made sense. Anyway, moving on to.
That one out of the
so email messaging is obviously going to be very important as well. Email has been and continues to be the most effective medium to reach prospects. A phone call and voicemail are helpful in letting prospects know that you're not mass marketing to them. You're a human being who's really interested in speaking, but email tends to be the preferred form of communication. It's probably not a surprise to anybody. Proper email training is extremely important in the training program to reduce ramp time. So arm your reps with templates that have proven to be effective. Encourage them to write their own. Do A/B testing in a systematic way. So again, there are tools that we utilize here at demandDrive that you probably do as well that can help you with this process, which we'll touch on. But the important part is that you're doing A/B testing in a systematic way. It's not anecdotal. You don't have sales reps saying, I think this message worked pretty well last time. I'll try it again. This is something that needs to be tracked. So as far as email goes, I think so demandDrive hires a lot of sales development reps that are 1 or 2 years removed from school that are aspiring to develop a career in sales and marketing, and you want to utilize the SDR role as a stepping stone or jumping off point to develop that career. So, we often assume, our recruiting process is pretty thorough, and we recruit from pretty good schools, and we assume that people will just innately know how to build an effective email message or innately know how to connect with people on the phone. And I guess so the point I'm trying to make here is rather than focusing on product, we really need to cover some of these basics, and that's really going to dramatically improve time to lead or ramp time. CRM is the last thing I'll touch on here as far as tactical training goes. Like most training programs in general, CRMs are not often set up specifically for the SDR function. That's something we do here at demandDrive pretty well compared to, I think, what when we see a lot of environments when we work with clients. But lead statuses, default lead statuses are often limited to working, not contacted, working, contacted. They're generally pretty limited. They're not built, again, for the sales development function. So think about your sales development process. Understand the different stages that might be helpful to track your rep's progress. And we use lead statuses like contact identified, maintenance, working with alternate contacts, several others, and that's just one. Lead status is one aspect of the CRM you can build, into your inside sales process. But what that does is it allows managers to understand how their reps are performing very early on in the process. So week 1, week 2. If our goal is to improve ramp time or time to lead, you don't want to wait 3 months before you realize that we have a large list of working, contacted, lead status, and we're not really sure what's happening with those. So setting up your CRM specifically for the SDR role, however you do it, is going to be an important part in reducing ramp time. So just to sort of sum it up here as far as the number 1 goes, the training process. Again, key takeaways are, let's develop a training process specific to the SDR function that focuses on some important SDR tactics rather than a broad sales training where everybody from the SDR to the account executive sits through, and it tends to be very heavy on product knowledge. One thing before we move on I'll mention is that it's probably important also to have a repeatable and scalable training process. We see it oftentimes when there's some turnover in the management layer. If these processes aren't well documented, training suffers. Ramp time is really affected. So moving on, number 2. Now that we've discussed training, which again I don't think anyone would disagree is the most important part of the SDR onboarding process, I'd like to talk about what I think is probably the second most important factor in onboarding is proactive management. Oftentimes, and this seems to be happening less and less, still does happen though, we hear organizations take the attitude that they can simply hire a couple of recent graduates and have them make phone calls. Now, I probably don't need to spend too much time discussing why this tends to be an ineffective sales development strategy, but I will say that even some large organizations with well-developed training programs lack a dedicated manager responsible for monitoring this process. So building a complete inside sales team with a dedicated manager is no doubt an expensive proposition. So it's enticing to think that hiring a couple of recent grads and letting them loose might be a good way to move forward. But in reality, the true cost of employing even these entry-level people isn't all that cheap. And without the proper process or management in place, it'll probably cost an organization more than what that team generates. So it goes without saying, but sales development managers should have an active role in the training process. They should be part of the initial training, largely on CRM process development and training on that process, as we just discussed. Having a consistent process shared by everyone is going to allow managers to actively gauge the performance of their team and reduce ramp time. One of the biggest impediments to reducing ramp time, and it's probably a reason why the industry average is closer to 6 months, is that no one is following, there's just inconsistent processes. No one's following the same processes with regard to, largely with regard to the CRM, but also with regard to just the sales development role overall. So having a dedicated manager solves that problem. The manager should lead intermittent training workshops with all the specific reps or individual reps based on perceived deficiencies. So again, main goal here is to reduce ramp time when onboarding new SDRs. The main benefit of having a dedicated and proactive sales development manager is to realize the shortcomings quickly and immediately and address them immediately. A lot of times we'll talk to organizations with no dedicated SDR management layer, and they simply think that maybe the VP of sales or the VP of marketing can carve out part of their day to manage the SDR function. And what happens is that lack of oversight really, really affects the ramp time, or time to lead. So the ability to build and monitor performance metrics, we kind of touched on it earlier, it's probably a good segue, is going to be kind of the last point I'd like to make here with regard to having a proactive manager. Developing key performance indicators or metrics that you're going to look at is one thing, but then actively monitoring them is really what needs to happen in order to make sure that that ramp time is as low as possible. So there's a quote that I've heard, attributed to several different business leaders, from GoDaddy to Sun Microsystems. I'm not sure who said it, but I'm gonna quote it anyway. It goes something like this: anything that is measured and watched improves. I really like that quote. Without a proactive manager, it's very difficult to closely monitor performance metrics. We have some metrics to track up here. Again, I'm sure you have your own. I'm sure you have several different metrics that you track. The key here is that they're constantly being monitored. As a result of lack of monitoring these metrics, SDR teams they tend to underperform. It just happens. People just perform better when they're being held accountable for those goals. I'm not talking about micromanaging here, but SDR ramp time is going to dramatically improve if they're held accountable. So, yeah, I think to wrap this section up again, I think we have a lot of sales development managers in the audience today. Again, it's going to be key that, so perhaps in your organizations this isn't a big problem, but again, we talk to a lot of companies that try to manage this with existing resources, maybe sales resources or marketing resources, and it's very ineffective, and it comes down to a couple things that we just explained, but most importantly, it's just the monitoring, so being able to realize problems immediately and track metrics closely. All right, so moving on to the third. So after training and proactive management, another very important factor in onboarding is going to be setting and articulating transparent goals. Even during the training process in the first couple weeks of the prospecting process, SDR should be not only given lead goals or metrics goals, but also some context around why those goals were set and why they're important. Why are these goals important? What contributions are they making to the overall company? I always like to work backwards from some high-level goal, like an overall revenue goal or a new logo goal, and you can whiteboard it out and work backwards and say, here's the revenue goal. Our current close rate is this on qualified opportunities. Our conversion rate is this from lead to opportunity. That means we need, as a team, we need to deliver this many leads per month. Our current lead conversion rates, we'll need this many conversations, and we'll need this many call activities to reach those. So you can break it all the way down to why they're required to make a certain number of call activities and connect with a certain number of people. In my experience, reps tend to perform better and more consistently when they know why they're trying to hit goals, when they understand the impact it makes. Also, once a rep understands the context of the goals that are laid out for him or her, this allows the sort of latitude and confidence to try new methods and uncover some personal styles. So at demandDrive, we have a pretty robust training program, but we always encourage our reps to develop their own style. And I think it becomes a lot easier when you understand the goal you're trying to accomplish, or you understand why you're trying to accomplish it, to develop some of your own processes and some of your own style. So setting goals early in the onboarding process is going to be important. I've made a couple of references to technology that can be used to facilitate some of these things. So I think John's going to take over and discuss a little bit of how technology might be able to help you. It's kind of the fourth.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Daniel. And that was great. I lost you a bit on the baseball reference.
Yeah,
but
probably should have been a cricket reference.
Yeah, very good. So, no, thanks. This is the final piece, the fourth piece that Dan has introduced me to here. So, sales is probably one of the last business divisions or processes or departments to receive the benefit of enhancement by software or automation. We've seen across the board various processes within business being enhanced by software, financial processes, marketing processes, supply chain management, you name it really across the board, HR, everything has received it. Sales is the last. And we kind of have relied on these old school methodologies for the last 10 years really, and they're still prevalent and they're still very effective, but we have finally entered an era of sales enablement and sales enablement tools via software implementation, SaaS tools, or however they've come really. And it couldn't have come at a better time to leverage the huge market, to leverage these tools to access the huge marketplace out there is essential for an SDR, because at the end of the day, quality, of course, is very important, but there is a certain number of metrics one has to hit in order to make sure that quality is reached. I'm going to list the different types of technology that should be used and should be implemented within the onboarding processes and training processes for SDR teams. You have, for example, the click-to-call pieces of software, which obviously increases the efficiency of a rep. The CRM integration and automation, again, that's an efficiency play to reduce the time to lead there. Again, it's just simply being able to allow the SDR to spend more time communicating with a prospect rather than logging their activities. Things like email tracking and call prompting, this is going to affect their effectiveness and increase their effectiveness in being able to identify that correct person, that interest level. You have things like mass sales emails and drip campaigns, really providing the salesperson with more marketing ability nowadays, which obviously impacts the quality of the leads that the SDR is going to be able to deliver, and the amount of conversations and QCs that they're going to be able to connect with. Also, the A/B testing side of things here is essential. And one of the things that demandDrive that we implement within the onboarding process is teaching reps how to become successful intelligence gatherers as well as lead providers, being on the forefront of prospecting and speaking on the front line to potential customers yields a lot of very useful information, and it's important to include in that onboarding process the training to deliver that information in an effective way to the relevant departments within your business. We have things like gamification tools. Obviously, that's a motivation play. That's going to increase the ramp time and also the tenure of a rep. And then you have things like the analytics on performance metrics that Dan touched upon earlier. There's plenty of pieces of software that help with that, and prospecting lists and things like subscriptions to lists that the SDRs can leverage in order to gain more prospect entry. Things like LinkedIn obviously help a lot. But we can't just hand our reps the keys to all of this technology and then wish them good luck. We have to provide thorough training, and it does represent a good portion of our training regimen here at demandDrive. A fundamental reason is that sales tools will provide a great return, but only when used properly. And it's the reason we integrate technology and processes in such a fundamental level here at demandDrive, being implementing and integrating these tools deep within the call plan and the SDR methodology. I've just been told I've got 1 more minute by my prompter, so I'll wrap this up and kind of summarize, and then we'll take some questions. But just to really explain a little bit more on this, we do train our reps on how to effectively use and really utilize these tools effectively in a call plan, but also how to use them within the sales development process is essential, and training the reps and when effectively and how effective to use it is essential. And we kind of have our secret sauce here, a combination of different types of technologies that we've implemented within that call plan. But I strongly recommend that you have a look around at these different types of technologies and find out what works best, and not just hand them to your reps, but implement them within your strategy and process. So to wrap up the entire webinar, really, the benefits of implementing a successful onboarding process really is to reduce that ramp time, effectively introducing all of these aspects we've seen here at demandDrive at least, reduces ramp time by 60%, and that's going against clients that we've onboarded and methodologies we've seen in the past. More effective and efficient lead generation resources, and finally increasing SDR retention by 30%. All great benefits to have from an onboarding process. So thanks very much for joining. We've run over a little bit, but I'll take a couple of questions. We've got a couple here. Probably, Dan, this one's for you. You mentioned SDR retention will increase. Yep, just mentioned that. What's the metric behind that specific processes for it?
Sure, good question. So the metrics that we showed a 30% increase. It's generally based on, well, again, the Bridge Group study of a 21-month SDR tenure is the average. So the retention rate here at demandDrive we see is it's just over 2 years, about 26 months. So that's how we arrived at that 30% increase number. That's impacted by a number of things. We talked about proactive management is probably the most important, transparent goals, and some context around those goals. But again, we hire SDRs that want to use this role as a jumping off point. They want to leverage this into a career in sales and marketing in a tech company. And so we don't expect them to stay forever. In fact, that 26 number is pretty healthy. What we want to limit is our reps that stay drastically shorter periods of time than that. So 3, 6 months at a time. That's when the ramp time, whether it's 1 month, whether it's 5 months, really compounds. Because if you're continuously trying to hire and replace reps that are leaving early, your lead flow is going to be seriously affected. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. There's one more here that I can take. It's probably addressed to me. You just talked technology outside of things like CRM and LinkedIn. What are you referring to? So I did say we do have a secret sauce here that we use a combination of different technologies to enhance SDR's performance. One of which I can allude to because we're partners with is Yesware. I can recommend them. They basically fulfill that efficiency side and automation side, and also the mass email side of things, empowering those reps to do drip campaigns, A/B testing, but at the same time integrating with your CRM. I think it's Salesforce that they specialize in, but they also do other CRMs. But essentially, they've implementing that piece of technology deep within our process has, and I think we have a white paper on it we're going to release soon, has drastically improved our metrics, leading to number of SQLs and quality of leads that we're giving our clients. But yeah, so unfortunately we don't have any time for any more. There's a couple more here that I'll send email answers to, but we will also email the presentation to all that attended today and all that couldn't make it. Thanks again, and we'll let you know about the next webinar soon.